Aftershocks. News of the release of the convicted Lockerbie bomber continue to reverberate across the Atlantic. London fends off claims of its alleged role in the affair, while Washington steps up its continued objections. Just what's behind al-Megrahi's release, apart from the compassionate grounds, and who stands to gain after this move? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sahil Rahman. 20 years after the UK's worst aviation disaster, one of its perpetrators has been freed to widespread condemnation. The UK government is already suffering from internal political scandals. Now the release of the only man to be convicted of involvement in the Lockerbie bombing is causing an international furore. Bethan Howe reports.
1988. 270 people are killed when a bomb explodes on Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie in Scotland. 189 victims were American. In 2001, a Libyan man was convicted of involvement in the bombing and sentenced to life in prison in Scotland. Last week, that man, Abdul Basit Ali Mohammed al-Megrahi, was released to the relief of some and the shock of many.
We're now in contact with the Libyan government and want to make sure that if, in fact, this transfer has taken place, that he's not welcomed back in some way, but instead should be under house arrest.
But that was not to be. He arrived to a hero's welcome, embraced by his country. While there has been some doubt in the UK over Megrahi's conviction, the jubilant scenes as he returned to Libya have angered relatives of the dead in the United States.
We've just released a man convicted of massacring 270 people. We've given state-sponsored terrorism a victory.
Attention's now being turned to the reasons behind the release. Scotland's Justice Secretary says Megrahi was freed under Scottish law on compassionate grounds, as he may have just months to live.
It was not based on political, diplomatic or economic considerations.
Although it was not used in this case, a prisoner transfer agreement was signed between Libya and the United Kingdom in April, some say paving the way for this move. The UK has been developing strong economic interests in Libya. Energy giant BP is to invest around $1 billion in exploration projects. But UK Business Minister Peter Mandelson has denied any link between the prisoner release and UK-Libyan trade deals.
But there has been absolutely no question whatsoever, and I can say this to you categorically, no brokered deal or no agreement between the Libyan government or the British government. It has been a matter entirely for the Scottish Justice Minister to exercise his discretion, and that's what he's done.
The US State Department has said relations between the United States and the UK will not be affected. Their relations with Libya, on the other hand, had been warming for the past 6 years. Now the State Department says there's a distinct possibility they may begin to cool.
And if they continue to lionize him in a public fashion, that these kinds of public demonstrations can only have a profoundly negative effect on our relationship.
Some senior US officials have asked for British Prime Minister Gordon Brown to publicly state if and how much ministers were involved in negotiating Megrahi's release. Whether it was the compassionate thing to do or part of a wider economic agreement, there's no doubt this release of just one man could further damage the beleaguered British government and possibly set back Libyan international relations by several years, let alone disappoint hundreds of families of the victims of the Lockerbie bombing. Bethan Howe, Inside Story.
Well, joining me on the programme today in Tripoli, Turbi, an expert on US-Libya relations who's based in California. On occasions, Mr. Turbi has testified before Congress on US-Libya foreign relations. In Washington, D.C., Niall Gardiner, director of the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom, and in London, Saad Jabbar, international lawyer, who's worked with the Libyan government on the Lockerbie case. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Niall Gardiner, can I begin with you? I mean, to describe the transatlantic war of words as a storm in a teacup would be an understatement. How serious is this war of words now in terms of the relationship between the US and the UK and the US and Libya?
Well, I think it's a pretty serious situation, actually, although, you know, I don't think that the Anglo-American special relationship is going to be hugely undermined in the long term. I think in the immediate term, though, there are some significant tensions between London and Washington. There's a great deal of anger here in the United States over the actions of the Scottish government, an appalling decision to release a mass murdering terrorist responsible for taking 270 lives. And there's also growing anger, I think, at the actions of the British government. It's unclear so far the extent to which Gordon Brown, David Miliband, Lord Mandelson were actually involved in the decision to release al-Megrahi. But the fact remains that there is growing evidence that there were discussions between senior members of the British government and Libyan officials in advance of the release, and there's certainly mounting speculation in London that some kind of backroom deal was conducted between the Labour government and the regime of Colonel Gaddafi.
Well, we'll look at
certainly growing concern.
Yeah, we'll look at those details. Sorry to interrupt. We'll look at those details certainly in more detail as we carry on with the programme. Mr. Lockerbie in Tripoli, what's your understanding from where you are as to how you think US, UK, US-Libya relations will continue after the release of al-Megrahi?
I think, first of all, I think we should all not lose sight of offering sympathy for the victims that were killed in the Lockerbie incident several years ago. I think, in my opinion, what's been going on in the last several days is a cultural clash. The Libyans, whom I have spent the last 2 weeks looking and seeing how they have reacted to the release of the Megrahi, they have, in my opinion, have done everything within their cultural boundaries, cultural limitations, to keep this as quiet as possible. As a matter of fact, almost a little less than 2 weeks ago, I was contacted by a major TV network asking me of what's going on the streets of Tripoli. Is there anticipation or any celebration of receiving this man? I was actually surprised. I picked up the phone, called a very, very senior official in the Libyan government, and I can almost feel him over the phone that he was wringing his hands. He said that we had an agreement with the Scottish government as well as the UK government that we would keep this a low key. So he was quite surprised. He declared that the man would be released on the 20th, and we will do everything we could to keep it quiet.
So they tried to keep it quiet, but it obviously didn't happen, though, did it, on the day itself when al-Megrahi arrived in Tripoli?
You know, let me tell you something interesting. Libya is made up of tribes, and this man comes from one of the largest tribes in Libya, and his reception was very measured. A few days before he came, in fact, as long as a week, there was nothing on the streets, nothing in the Libyan media about his arrival. I think the thing that might have actually upset some people in the public or even some officials in the Libyan government is the raising of Saif al-Islam's hand with Megrahi on top of the plane coming down. That might have ushered, we won something, but
Sure.
He innocently did that, I know, because he's been involved in the negotiations to some extent, and he felt like he's reached a point of some form of accomplishment.
Well, let's bring in our... sorry to interrupt. I want to bring in our guest in from London to give us a wider perspective now outside of Libya. Saad Jabbar, an esteemed lawyer, working very closely with the Libyan government over al-Megrahi's case. I mean, you've listened to what both sides have said, both in Washington, D.C. now and in Tripoli. What's your understanding of the situation from your perspective?
Well, one shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission ordered the appeal or ordered the opening of the case, and it didn't reopen the case on flimsy grounds. It believed, and it's a commission, an independent commission consisting of leading lawyers, churchmen, laymen, policemen. They believed that Abdul Basit al-Megrahi was convicted on very flimsy grounds, and that there was a great evidence showing that he was a victim of gross miscarriage of justice. Abdul Basit al-Megrahi abandoned his appeal only when he knew he had no choice. He wanted to give the Scottish authorities the chance either to transfer him according to the prisoner transfer agreement or to use their compassionate grounds. I think the Americans believe in the formal decision, the old decision. And as far as Abdul Basit al-Megrahi, he worked very hard for that decision to be taken, to reopen his case. And anyone who looked at the case like I did for many years, I assure you that there was, the conviction of Abdul Basit al-Megrahi, the accusation of Libya took place because of international political convenience, because originally the United States, and it is on the record, and I hope one day an independent inquiry should be opened to look at all the evidence which led to point the finger at Libya when the finger was pointing somewhere else. And let me say another thing. No,
we're going to have this discussion more as well about the future and what can happen with the case being looked at in terms of a full public inquiry. But let's just continue with the war of words at the moment. Niall Gardiner in Washington. The real problem at the moment is that you have Obama saying that the situation is highly objectionable. One wonders really that surely the Americans didn't have their eyes closed. They knew this was going on. They could have put pressure on the Scottish government or even the British government, but nothing seems to have happened. So reading between the lines, the thought of backroom deals does come to the forefront, and many commentators across the media spectrum are suggesting this.
Well, interesting question, but let me respond firstly to some of the comments made by your guests in Tripoli. This was not a measured response in Tripoli. We saw thousands of flag-waving individuals treating al-Megrahi, a convicted terrorist, as some sort of returning hero. This was an orchestrated reception by Colonel Gaddafi. This was not some sort of spontaneous reception. So I think we want to just clear that up first of all. And those scenes, by the way, were absolutely sickening on the streets of Tripoli and viewed with revulsion here in the United States. With regard to the role of the Obama administration, I would say that it was made very clear, certainly by the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, in advance of the release, that the release would be strongly opposed by the United States. I would say, though, that President Obama should have done more to intervene ahead of the release. He should have spoken out more forcefully and more strongly against the release. He did not do so, but other members of his administration did strongly urge the British government and the Scottish authorities not to release al-Megrahi. But I think there will be questions raised in the United States, possibly at congressional hearings, with regard to the actions of the Obama administration. Did they apply enough pressure on both the Scots and the British in an attempt to try and head off the release of al-Megrahi, a man, after all, who murdered over 180 Americans? Okay. So there's certainly a huge
I'm going to bring back in Mr. Jabahi, because he does want to come in and respond to what you were just saying there, Niall.
Yeah, I think firstly Scotland or Britain are not a state amongst the United States of America. They are a sovereign country and they have a due process which has preceded the American existence or civilization. And secondly, the previous speaker from Tripoli has alluded to it. The Libyans, the thousands of Libyans who have welcomed Abdul Basit al-Megrahi, they did not welcome him and hailed him as a killer or as a heroic terrorist. They knew they were receiving and welcoming someone who was a victim of miscarriage of justice. And secondly, a man who is dying and he wished to die in his own country. Let me make clear one thing. The Libyan society is a very small society, and they have extended families, and they feel Abdul Basit as one of them. And if Abdul Basit al-Megrahi went to Cairo in Egypt, or he went to Algiers in Algeria, or Tangier or Rabat in Morocco, believe me, he would have given a better reception. And if the Libyan government allowed spontaneous welcome rather than a measured welcome, believe me, the streets of Tripoli would have been really overcrowded by people welcoming him. And there is nothing wrong with that. I understand the viewpoint from the West, from the United States, but that feeling, I understand it, because I lived all my life in the West, but I know the Arab tradition as well. The Arab tradition here to suggest
he is a convicted killer.
Listen,
he's not some kind of returning hero.
He was convicted formally. He was convicted formally during the administration which your Heritage Foundation supports, during the Republicans, then the Democrats. And we know the type of evidence you have in the United States. You have the evidence that Iraq
you
had.
You either believe in the rule of law
where are the weapons of mass destruction?
Let me respond to what you're saying.
Mr. Jabbar, let Mr. Gardiner respond as well. Thank you. Mr. Gardiner.
Yeah. You know, you are defending here a mass murderer who's taken away nearly 300 lives.
You are defending a miscarriage.
I hope you understand the anger
you are defending a miscarriage of justice. I understand the anger.
This decision.
I understand the anger. I understand the anger. But I understand. Listen.
Terrorist.
No, he was convicted. You have provided the wrong information.
Disgusting and revolting.
You need to let Mr. Gardiner respond, Mr. Jabbar, please.
Listen to me. I have to respond because you are making a very serious allegation here, and you should withdraw it forthwith. I am saying, I've looked at the file of al-Megrahi. I looked at the evidence. I looked at all aspects of this case.
Well, you're a defense lawyer. Obviously, you would have been looking at the files and drawing your own conclusions. You're not unbiased on this issue at all, are you?
No, you are.
Let me say here that
evidence in
there was a fair trial held for Mr. al-Megrahi. He was convicted in a court of law.
That's all history.
Formally,
we know, gentlemen, both in Washington and in London, we do know that, of course, al-Megrahi was convicted on that. He has not been cleared of the deaths of what happened in Lockerbie in 1988. Let's just try and move this on, or so we'll just get bogged down this particular point that you're trying to make. Let's go back to Tripoli and to Omar Turbi. You see this. We are losing sight slightly of what's being said, but what now is...
We're losing sight of what the important focus in this whole matter is to get to a clear understanding of what the United States' perception of this release and what circumstances have this man been released under the Scottish law.
Well, what are the long-term consequences, Mr.
Let me assure you of one thing. Excuse me, let me talk, please. Let me assure you of one thing. I'm an American, and America's interest is in my heart. I can assure you my judgment as far as Libyans receiving this man here is very, very small. In my opinion, they could have had many more people out on the streets. They could have had much bigger celebration. And the Libyan government and the public are trying within their cultural boundaries and local consumption to do everything they can to project sensitivity to this. I do believe that if this man was released 20, 30 years from today, he would have received the same number of people receiving him on the streets. It had nothing to do with winning a case or losing a case. And I might add, as close as the United States and the UK and Scotland to each other, I do believe they did not coordinate properly on this man's release. President Obama was actually making statements based on very little information. I believe the State Department spokesman said that we had, before his release, had warned the Libyans as well as the Scottish government to do this on a low-key basis. One more dimension to this here. I don't understand why people are talking about serving his rest of his sentence in Tripoli. The Justice Minister in Scotland made a decision on compassionate ground, which means that this sick man who's dying will be released to Libya, and he will be living in Libya and not serve the rest of his sentence. And I think our objective should be to assure the Libyans and everyone's mutual interest in this whole matter to kind of cool heads and move forward. The United States cannot afford at this point in time in history to create any more headaches in the region. Its relationship with Libya is, in my opinion, as best as it's ever been. There is a lot of trade going on. There's a lot of exchanges of intelligence on terrorism. They do have mutual interest. And I do hope that this would blow away some of the senators, members of Congress, or some members of the media in the United States or the UK.
Mr. Turby, that doesn't seem to be the case, though, does it really? If I bring Niall Gardiner back in Washington, that doesn't seem to be the case. You have FBI Chief Robert Mueller saying it makes a mockery of the rule of law. You have Joseph Lieberman, a senator, also concerned about the events of the past few days and the release of al-Megrahi. Do you think the United States, in some shape or form, if you look to the future now, we move on from what's happened in the past week, can move forward from what happened in December 1988, can move on now in a few years' time, perhaps?
If we do.
Mr. Gardiner?
Yes, if I could respond. I think the release of al-Megrahi will fundamentally change the long-term nature of US-Libyan relations. We are going to see a massive backlash on Capitol Hill once Congress reconvenes. You are going to see congressional hearings. You're going to see talk of placing Libya back on the State Department's list of state sponsors of terrorism.
Will it be all
You're going
talk?
to hear talk of sanctions.
Will it be all talk, though?
You are going to... No, I don't. I think you are going to see congressional action over this matter. There is tremendous unhappiness here in Washington over what has happened, and you are going to see a furious backlash. The condemnation that we've seen also from the FBI director, also from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, unprecedented condemnation here of the actions, in this case, of a close ally, Scotland and also the United Kingdom. There's also, I think, a broader question of how the US and the UK will overcome the fallout from this issue, and that's why it's so important for Gordon Brown and for Peter Mandelson and other ministers to come absolutely clean over the exact nature of their discussions with Colonel Gaddafi's son, Saif, and also, of course, Gaddafi's inner circles and his business concerns. So there are certainly implications, I think, also for the broader US-UK alliance. But with regard to US-Libyan relations, yes, I think there will be hell to pay for Libya. And when Colonel Gaddafi comes to New York next month for the UN General Assembly, there will be huge protests and wall-to-wall media coverage of his visit, and it will be highly negative.
Indeed. Saeed Jabbar in London, can I just bring you in here? I mean, how do you see now this relationship? You visit Libya, you visit the United States, you live in the United Kingdom. In terms of this troika of relationships between the three, do you agree with what Mr. Gardiner was just saying, then there will be some sort of backlash between Libya and the USA?
Well, the Heritage Foundation is very well known for its right-wing leanings, and they have lost the elections in the United States, and they have been behind all the smear against Libya and all those who believe in the due process. They were in favor of Guantanamo and other outlaw behavior. And of course, anyone who is a decent man should really address the issue of who was behind the Lockerbie issue. That's why I think a public and an independent inquiry should be established to look at all aspects of the Lockerbie case, not only the criminal side of it. The criminal side should be involved as well as to why Libya was accused in the first place, why two people were brought to trial, and why so much evidence was fabricated or withheld from a Scottish court.
Yes.
These are the issues, and I think if I like to protect Western interests in Libya, including that of the United States, I would not listen to Mr. Gardiner and the Heritage Foundation and Mr. John Bolton. I would look at common sense and say this. I think we move forward without forgetting to address the issue as to who was the culprit. And secondly, for the British, I think the British, the Minister of Justice in Scotland has taken the right decision for right reasons, and that's what I've been saying all along.
Sure.
A man was dying. Compassionate grounds exist in Scottish law, and the Scottish, remember, the Scots created the modern political system in the United States.
Well,
they were the pioneers of the educational system in the United States, and they are not.
There, I'm afraid, Mr. Jabbar, we have to leave it.
The Scots.
There, I'm afraid, Mr. Jabbar, we have to leave it.
I think due process.
There, I'm afraid, Mr. Jabbar, we have to leave it. I do apologise. Of course, we do appreciate the position that the Scottish government are in. And to all my guests, both in Tripoli, Washington and in London, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. And thank you so much for joining us on the programme. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please do email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Sahil Rahman. Thanks for your time and your company.